The stars looked cold and distant through the cracked viewport of the dying ship, and Kayla Starwind pressed her hand against the glass, feeling the chill seep through her gloves as she watched the last of her power reserves flicker on the control panel before her. The Sylvani Guardian had never imagined she would find herself in this position, because her people were supposed to be the greatest navigators and warriors in the known galaxy, and yet here she was drifting helplessly through an asteroid field with failing life support and no way to call for help from her own kind. The two small dragons curled on her shoulders, chirped softly in distress, and Kayla reached up to stroke their scales, trying to offer comfort even though she had none to give, because she knew they could sense her fear through the bond they shared. Zephyr and Luna had been with her since they hatched 3 cycles ago, and they trusted her completely to keep them safe, but now she was failing them in the most fundamental way possible. Her ship had been ambushed 6 hours ago while she transported a cargo of power crystals from the mining colonies back to the Sylvani homeworld, and the raiders had come out of nowhere with weapons that tore through her shields like they were made of paper. Kayla had fought back with everything she had, and she managed to destroy 2 of the attacking vessels before her own ship took critical damage to the engine core and navigation systems. She had sent out a distress signal on all frequencies, but she knew the chances of another Sylvani ship being close enough to reach her in time were almost zero, because this sector of space was considered too dangerous for regular patrol routes. The asteroid field was notorious for its unpredictable gravitational pulls and hidden debris that could shred a ship to pieces before the pilot even knew what hit them. The air was getting thinner now, and Kayla could feel the beginning stages of oxygen deprivation starting to affect her thoughts, because everything seemed slower and hazier than it should be. She had maybe 2 hours left before the atmosphere became completely unbreathable and the cold of space started to seep into the hull and freeze everything inside, including her and the dragons. Kayla had always been proud of her heritage and her position as a guardian of the Sylvani Empire, because her people were known throughout the galaxy as the most advanced and cultured species that had ever evolved. The Sylvani had mastered technologies that other races could barely comprehend, and their society had existed for thousands of years while younger species were still learning to leave their home planets. But that pride felt hollow now as she sat alone in her broken ship, waiting to die, because what good was advanced technology when it could not save her from the simple problem of being stranded without power or air? She thought about her family back on the homeworld and wondered if they would ever know what happened to her, or if she would simply disappear into the void like so many others who had ventured too far from safety. The dragon stirred restlessly, and Luna spread her wings, stretching them as far as the cramped cockpit would allow before folding them back against her body with a frustrated huff. Kayla knew they needed more space to move, and more importantly, they needed fresh air and food, but she had nothing left to give them except her presence and her love. She was about to close her eyes and accept her fate when a new sound cut through the silence of the cockpit, and it took her a moment to recognize it as an incoming communication signal. Kayla's heart leaped in her chest, and she scrambled to activate the receiver, even though her fingers felt clumsy and slow because the lack of oxygen was affecting her coordination now. The view screen flickered to life, and Kayla found herself staring at a face that was completely unfamiliar to her, because it belonged to a species she had only heard about in reports from the outer colonies. The human woman on the screen had dark hair pulled back in a practical style and eyes that were warm brown instead of the gold or silver that Kayla was used to seeing in other advanced species. The human spoke in standard galactic language, and her accent was strange but understandable as she identified herself as Commander Lisa Kane of the Earth vessel Wanderer. She explained that they had picked up Kayla's distress signal and were moving to intercept her position, and she asked if Kayla needed assistance with evacuation or repairs. Kayla felt a wave of conflicting emotions wash over her, because asking humans for help went against everything she had been taught about the proper order of the galaxy. The Sylvani considered humans to be newcomers who had barely begun to explore the stars, and who still relied on primitive technologies that were centuries behind the standard. Accepting rescue from them would be humiliating, and it would mean admitting that the great Sylvani Empire could not take care of its own people. But as she looked at the two dragons who were depending on her to make the right choice, Kayla realized that her pride meant nothing compared to their lives. She swallowed hard and forced herself to respond with as much dignity as she could manage telling Lisa that yes, she needed help because her ship was critically damaged and her life support would fail completely within the next 2 hours. Lisa's expression changed to one of concern, and she immediately began giving orders to her crew in the background while keeping her attention focused on Kayla. She assured the Silvani Guardian that they would reach her position in 30 minutes and that they had the equipment necessary to bring her ship into their cargo bay for repairs. Kayla wanted to protest and say that she did not need that much assistance, but the words died in her throat because she could see the genuine concern in Lisa's eyes, and it confused her. The humans were supposed to be selfish and territorial according to everything the Silvani had taught about them, but this woman was offering help without asking for anything in return. The communication ended, and Kayla sat back in her chair feeling exhausted and uncertain about what would happen next because she had never interacted with humans before except through official reports and intelligence briefings. Everything she knew about them suggested they were aggressive and unpredictable, but also surprisingly innovative when it came to solving problems that other species considered impossible. Zephyr nuzzled against her cheek and made a soft cooing sound that usually meant he was hungry, and Kayla wished she had something to feed him, but all her supplies had been destroyed when the raiders hit her cargo bay. She promised the little dragon that the humans would help them and that everything would be fine, even though she was not sure she believed it herself. The minutes ticked by slowly, and Kayla watched through her viewport as a ship appeared from behind one of the larger asteroids, moving with careful precision through the dangerous field. The human vessel was smaller than she expected, and its design was functional rather than elegant, with heavy armor plating and visible weapon systems that spoke of a species that expected to fight for survival. As the ship drew closer, Kayla could see crew members moving around inside through the lit windows, and she felt a strange flutter in her chest that might have been nervousness, or might have been something else entirely. She was about to place her life and the lives of her dragons in the hands of a species that the Silvani had dismissed as primitive, and she had no idea if this was the worst mistake she would ever make or the beginning of something that would change everything she believed about the galaxy. The cargo bay doors of the human ship opened like a giant mouth ready to swallow her whole, and Kayla watched with mixed feelings as her damaged vessel was pulled inside by tractor beams that hummed with a frequency she had never encountered before. The technology was different from what the Silvani used, but it seemed to work just as effectively, and she had to admit that surprised her because she had expected human equipment to be clumsy and unreliable. Through the viewport, she could see human crew members rushing around in protective suits preparing equipment and setting up what looked like medical stations and emergency repair tools. They moved with practiced efficiency and clear coordination that spoke of a well-trained team, and Kayla felt some of her anxiety ease slightly because at least these humans seemed to know what they were doing, even if their methods were unfamiliar. The moment her ship settled onto the deck with a gentle bump, the atmosphere in the cargo bay began to pressurize, and Kayla could hear the hiss of air filling the space around her vessel. She checked her instruments and was relieved to see that the humans were using a breathable mixture that would work for both her biology and the dragons, because not all species bothered to accommodate the needs of those they rescued. Zephyr and Luna sensed that something was about to happen, and they became more alert, with their wings twitching nervously and their eyes darting around looking for potential threats. Kayla stroked them both gently and whispered reassurances in the ancient Silvani language that she used only with them, because it helped calm their instincts when they felt afraid or uncertain. A voice came through her communication system, and it was Lisa again telling her that it was safe to open her airlock now, and that medical personnel were standing by if she or her companions needed assistance. Kayla appreciated that the human commander was giving her the choice rather than forcing the issue, because control was important to her, especially in a situation where she felt so vulnerable. She stood slowly because her legs felt weak from the oxygen deprivation and the stress of the last several hours, and she made her way to the airlock with the dragons following close behind. When the door opened, she was hit by a wave of fresh air that tasted slightly different from what she was used to, but it was clean and rich with oxygen, and she took several deep breaths, feeling her head clear for the first time since the attack. Lisa stood waiting just outside the airlock with 2 other humans beside her, and Kayla noticed that none of them were carrying visible weapons, which seemed like either a sign of trust or incredible foolishness. The commander stepped forward with her hand extended in what Kayla recognized as a human greeting gesture, and there was a moment of hesitation before Kayla reached out to clasp the offered hand. The contact was brief, but Kayla felt a strange warmth from the touch that had nothing to do with temperature, and everything to do with the genuine welcome she saw in Lisa's eyes. No one had ever looked at her quite like that before, because most people either feared her status as a guardian or treated her with the cold formality that was standard among the Sylvani. Lisa introduced the other two humans as Dr. Amy Brooks and Engineer Danny Chen, and both of them smiled at Kayla with the same open friendliness that their commander showed. Amy immediately focused her attention on the dragons and asked if she could examine them to make sure they were not injured, and Kayla found herself nodding permission before she even thought about whether it was wise to let a human touch her sacred companions. The dragons seemed to sense that Amy meant no harm, and they allowed her to gently check their wings and scales while making soft chirping sounds that usually meant they were content. Luna even nuzzled against Amy's hand, seeking more attention, and Kayla felt a flutter of surprise because her dragons were normally very selective about who they allowed to touch them. Danny moved past them to examine Kayla's ship, and he let out a low whistle as he took in the extent of the damage to the hull and engine systems. He muttered something about impressive firepower and lucky shots before pulling out a scanning device that looked nothing like the equipment Kayla was familiar with, but seemed to be giving him detailed information about the structural integrity of her vessel. Lisa guided Kayla away from the ship toward a small room that had been set up with comfortable seating and a table laden with food and drinks. She explained that Kayla probably needed rest and nourishment before they discussed the repairs, and that her crew would take good care of the ship while she recovered her strength. Kayla wanted to protest that she was fine, and that she needed to supervise the repairs personally, but her body betrayed her by swaying slightly from exhaustion. Lisa caught her elbow, steadying her with a gentle grip, and there was no judgment. In her expression, only concern, and Kayla felt something inside her chest tighten with an emotion she could not name. The food on the table was unfamiliar, but it smelled appealing, and Lisa explained that they had used the information from Kayla's distress signal to synthesize meals that should be compatible with Sylvanite biology. She had also included some raw meat for the dragons because the signal had mentioned that Kyla was traveling with bonded companions, and Lisa assumed they would need feeding as well. Kayla sat down heavily in one of the chairs and watched as Zephyr and Luna dove toward the meat with enthusiastic chirps, because they had not eaten since before the attack, and they were clearly starving. She picked up one of the items from her own plate and tasted it cautiously, finding that it was surprisingly good even though the spices were different from what she was used to. Lisa sat across from her and asked gentle questions about what had happened during the attack, and whether Kayla had any idea who the raiders were or why they had targeted her specifically. Kayla found herself answering honestly, explaining about the power crystals she had been transporting and how valuable they were on the black market, because they could be used to create weapons that bypassed most standard shields. As she talked, Kayla realized that Lisa was really listening to her, not just waiting for her turn to speak, but actually paying attention to every word and responding with thoughtful questions that showed she understood the implications of what Kayla was saying. It was a strange experience because most people either talked over her or treated her words as if they were laws that could not be questioned. Amy returned after finishing her examination of the dragons and reported that they were both healthy, though slightly dehydrated and stressed from the ordeal. She had given them supplements that would help, and she suggested that they be allowed to rest in a quiet space for a few hours while their bodies recovered from the trauma. Lisa immediately offered to set up one of the crew quarters as a temporary habitat for Kayla and the dragons, and she assured her that it would be private and secure, with everything they needed to be comfortable. Kayla felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion, because she had expected the humans to treat her like a burden or a curiosity, but instead, they were treating her like a guest who deserved respect and care. Danny came in a few minutes later, with a detailed report on the damage to Kyla's ship, and his expression was serious as he explained that the engine core was completely destroyed and would need to be replaced, along with most of the navigation systems and a large section of the hull plating. The repairs would take at least 3 days, maybe longer, depending on whether they could fabricate the necessary parts or if they would need to source them from a trading post. Kayla felt her heart sink because 3 days was a long time to be dependent on the charity of humans, and she knew that her people would be furious if they found out she had accepted such extensive help from a species they considered inferior. But she also knew that she had no choice because without those repairs, her ship would never fly again, and she would be stranded here forever. Lisa must have seen the conflict on her face because she leaned forward and said something that surprised Kayla more than anything else that had happened so far. She told Kayla that she was welcome to stay as long as necessary, and that the human crew considered it an honor to help a Silvani guardian because they respected the courage it took to ask for assistance from strangers. In that moment, Kayla felt something shift inside her because she realized that maybe everything she had been taught about humans was wrong, and maybe there was more to this young species than the Silvani had ever bothered to learn. The crew quarters that Lisa assigned to Kayla were larger and more comfortable than she expected, and someone had already set up perches for the dragons near the window, where they could watch the stars drift past. Zephyr and Luna immediately claimed their spots and settled down with their wings folded against their bodies, looking more relaxed than they had been since before the attack. Kayla stood in the center of the room feeling uncertain about what to do next, because she was used to having a mission and a purpose, and now she was trapped in a strange ship surrounded by humans who kept doing kind things that made no sense. She touched the bed experimentally and found it was softer than the sleeping platforms on Silvani vessels, and there were extra blankets folded at the foot, even though the temperature was already comfortable. A soft chime at the door announced a visitor, and Kayla called out permission to enter, expecting it to be Lisa, or maybe Amy checking on her again. Instead, a young human man stepped inside, carrying a large container that smelled absolutely wonderful, and he introduced himself as Kevin Palmer from the galley, saying he had brought some fresh food for her and the dragons. Kevin had an easy smile and a relaxed manner that put Kayla at ease despite her initial wariness, and he explained that he had researched Silvani dietary preferences and prepared several dishes that he hoped she would enjoy. He also brought fruits and vegetables for the dragons because Amy had told him they needed variety in their diet to stay healthy. Kayla thanked him stiffly because she was not used to this level of personal service from anyone, and Kevin just grinned and told her to let him know if she needed anything else before leaving with a casual wave. After he left, Kayla sat on the bed and stared at the food, wondering why these humans were being so nice to her when she had nothing to offer them in return. The next morning, Kayla woke to find that someone had left fresh clothes outside her door, in a style similar to what she had been wearing but made from human materials that were softer and more comfortable. There was also a note from Lisa inviting her to breakfast in the common area if she felt up to joining the crew, and Kayla decided that hiding in her room would be cowardly, so she dressed and made her way through the corridors with the dragons perched on her shoulders. The common area was filled with humans eating and talking and laughing together, and the noise level dropped noticeably when Kayla entered because everyone turned to look at her with open curiosity. She felt exposed and uncomfortable under all those eyes, but then Lisa stood up and waved her over to an empty seat at her table, and gradually the other conversations resumed. Amy was already sitting at the table along with Danny and Kevin, and they all greeted Kayla warmly as if having a Silvani guardian eating breakfast with them was the most normal thing in the world. Lisa passed her a plate and explained what each item was because human food was very different from what Kayla was used to, but she tried everything because refusing would have been rude. Danny talked enthusiastically about the repairs to her ship and explained that he had found some creative solutions to the engine problems by combining Silvani technology with human innovations. He seemed genuinely excited about the challenge, and he kept asking Kayla questions about how certain systems worked because he wanted to make sure the repairs would meet her standards. Kayla found herself drawn into the conversation, despite her intentions to remain distant and professional, because Danny's enthusiasm was infectious, and his questions showed a level of understanding that surprised her. She had assumed humans would struggle with advanced Silvani technology, but Danny grasped the concepts quickly and even suggested improvements that Kayla had never considered. After breakfast, Lisa offered to give Kayla a tour of the ship, and they walked through the corridors together with the dragons flying ahead, exploring everything with cheerful curiosity. Lisa explained that the Wanderer was a research and rescue vessel designed to operate in dangerous regions where other ships would not go, and that her crew was made up of volunteers who wanted to help people regardless of their species or status. They stopped at the observation deck, and Kayla stood at the window looking out at the asteroid field that had nearly killed her just yesterday. Lisa joined her, and they stood in comfortable silence for a while, before Lisa asked what Kayla would do after her ship was repaired, and whether she planned to return immediately to Sylvani space. The question caught Kayla off guard because she had been trying not to think about what would happen next and the complicated feelings that came with it. She told Lisa that she was expected back at her post as a guardian, and that her people would be worried about her, but even as she said the words, they felt hollow and meaningless. Lisa nodded thoughtfully and said that duty was important, but so was taking time to process what had happened because traumatic experiences could affect people in ways they did not expect. She offered to let Kayla stay on the Wanderer for a few extra days after the repairs were complete if she needed time to recover before facing her responsibilities. Kayla felt something warm bloom in her chest at the offer, because no one had ever suggested that her well-being mattered more than her duties. Among the Sylvani Guardians were expected to be strong and unbreakable, and showing weakness or asking for help was seen as a failure of character. Over the next 2 days, Kayla found herself spending more and more time with the human crew and learning things about them that challenged everything she thought she knew. She discovered that humans were incredibly adaptable and creative when solving problems because they did not have the same rigid adherence to tradition that limited the Sylvani. She watched Amy treat a crew member who had been injured during a repair job and was amazed by the gentleness and compassion the doctor showed, even though the injury was minor. Among the Sylvani, medical treatment was efficient but cold, and doctors rarely bothered with comfort when they could simply fix the problem and move on. She spent time in the engine room with Danny and learned that humans built their ships to be modified and upgraded constantly because they believed that technology should evolve with their needs rather than staying fixed in one perfect form. The Sylvani built ships that lasted for centuries without changing because they believed their designs were already perfect. She ate meals in the common area and listened to the crew tell stories about their families and their homes and their dreams for the future, and she realized that humans valued personal connections and emotional bonds in ways that the Sylvani had forgotten. Her people had become so focused on maintaining their superiority and their traditions that they had lost touch with the simple joy of friendship. The dragons thrived in this environment, and they became more playful and affectionate with each passing day. Luna developed a particular fondness for Amy, and would often fly to the doctor's quarters to visit even when Kayla was elsewhere on the ship. Zephyr bonded with Danny, and liked to watch him work in the engine room perched on his shoulder and chirping encouragement when he solved difficult problems. Kyla found herself drawn to Lisa more than anyone else, and they fell into a pattern of meeting at the observation deck each evening to watch the stars and talk about everything and nothing. Lisa asked questions about Sylvani culture and history with genuine interest, and she listened to Kayla's answers without judgment, even when Kayla admitted things about her people that she had never voiced before. She told Lisa about how lonely it was to be a guardian, because the position set her apart from other Sylvani, and how she was expected to be perfect and strong at all times without showing doubt or weakness. She talked about the pressure to maintain the image of Sylvani superiority, even when she sometimes questioned whether her people really were better than everyone else. Lisa shared her own struggles with leadership and the weight of being responsible for the lives of her crew, and the difficult decisions she had to make when there were no good options. She talked about the fear of failure and the loneliness of Command, and Kayla realized that despite their differences, they understood each other in ways that transcended species and culture. On the third night, Kayla stood at the observation deck window with Lisa beside her and felt something shift in her heart, because she realized she did not want to leave this ship or these people who had shown her more kindness in a few days than she had received in years from her own kind. The thought terrified her because it meant admitting that everything she had believed about the proper order of the galaxy was wrong, and that accepting help from humans had changed her in ways she could not undo. Danny announced on the fourth morning that the repairs to Kayla's ship were complete, and that all systems were functioning at full capacity, and actually running better than they had been before the attack. He seemed proud of his work, and rightfully so, because he had managed to integrate human efficiency improvements into the Sylvani design, without compromising the original integrity of the vessel. Kayla should have felt relieved and happy that she could finally leave and return to her duties. But instead, she felt a heavy weight settle in her stomach because leaving meant saying goodbye to people who had become important to her in ways she had not expected. She thanked Danny for his excellent work and asked if she could run some tests on the ship before departing, and he agreed enthusiastically because he wanted to see how well his modifications performed. She spent the morning in her ship running diagnostics and checking every system twice because she wanted to delay the inevitable moment when she would have to make a decision about her future. The dragons sensed her distress and they stayed close to her, making soft, worried sounds that tugged at her heart because they had been so happy on the Wanderer, and she knew they would miss the humans who had treated them with such kindness. Lisa found her in the cargo bay in the afternoon, sitting on the deck next to her ship with Zephyr and Luna, curled in her lap. The commander sat down beside her without saying anything, and they remained in comfortable silence for several minutes, before Kayla finally spoke and told Lisa that her ship was ready, and that she should probably leave soon before she caused the crew any more inconvenience. Lisa turned to look at her with those warm brown eyes that seemed to see right through all of Kayla's carefully maintained walls, and she asked quietly if that was really what Kayla wanted, or if she was just doing what she thought was expected of her. The question hit Kayla like a physical blow because no one had ever asked her what she wanted before, and she realized she did not know how to answer. She told Lisa about the expectations placed on Silvani guardians and how she was supposed to be above personal desires and emotional attachments because her duty to her people came before everything else. She explained that accepting help from humans had already damaged her reputation, and that staying longer would only make things worse because the Silvani Council would see it as a betrayal of their values. Lisa listened without interrupting, and when Kayla finished, she said something that changed everything. She told Kayla that sometimes the bravest thing a person could do was to choose their own path, even when it went against what everyone expected, and that real strength came from being honest about what mattered most, rather than pretending to be something you were not. Kayla felt tears prick at her eyes because she had spent so many years being the perfect guardian and following all the rules and never questioning whether the Silvani way was the only way or even the right way. But these humans had shown her a different possibility, and now she could not unsee it no matter how hard she tried. That evening, the crew organized a farewell dinner for Kayla in the common area, and they decorated the space with lights and flowers that Kevin had been growing in the ship's small garden. Everyone brought food to share, and there was music playing, and people laughing and telling stories, and Kayla felt overwhelmed by the warmth and acceptance that surrounded her. Amy gave her a gift of medical supplies for her dragons, and a handwritten guide on their care that included notes about their individual personalities and preferences. Danny presented her with a modified communication device that would allow her to contact the Wanderer from anywhere in the galaxy if she ever needed help or just wanted to talk. Kevin brought a container of preserved foods that he had prepared specially for her journey home. Lisa waited until the end of the evening to give Kayla her gift, and it was a small crystal pendant that caught the light and sparkled with rainbow colors. She explained that it was a human tradition to give travelers a token to remember their friends by, and that she hoped Kayla would keep it as a reminder that she always had a place on the Wanderer if she wanted to return. Kayla held the pendant in her hand and felt something break open inside her chest because she realized that she had found something on this human ship that she had been missing her entire life without knowing it. She had found people who saw her as more than just her title and her duties, and who cared about her happiness and well-being without expecting anything in return. She looked around at all the faces watching her with genuine affection and concern, and she made a decision that would have been unthinkable just a week ago. She told them that she was grateful for everything they had done, and that she needed to return to Silvani space to fulfill her current obligations, but that she wanted to come back if they would have her, because she had learned more from them in a few days than she had learned in years among her own people. The crew erupted in cheers, and Lisa pulled her into a hug that Kayla returned fiercely because physical affection was rare among the Silvani. But she was learning to appreciate the human way of expressing emotion through touch. The dragons flew, circles around the room, chirping happily because they could sense Kayla's joy and relief through their bond. Later that night, Kayla stood in the cargo bay preparing to depart, and Lisa came to see her off one final time. They stood facing each other, and Kayla felt the weight of everything unspoken between them, because she knew that what she felt for this human woman was more than just friendship. But she did not have the words to express it properly. Lisa seemed to understand anyway because she reached out and took Kayla's hands in hers and told her to be safe and to come back soon because the Wanderer would not be the same without her. Kayla promised that she would return as quickly as possible and that she would use the communication device Danny gave her to stay in touch. She boarded her ship with the dragons and began the launch sequence, and as she pulled away from the Wanderer, she looked back at the vessel that had saved her life and changed her perspective on everything. She saw the crew gathered at the observation windows waving goodbye, and she felt her heart swell with emotions that were both painful and wonderful at the same time. The journey back to Sylvanie space took 3 days, and Kayla used the time to think about what she would say to the council when they questioned her about accepting human assistance. She knew there would be consequences, because her people did not approve of fraternizing with species they considered inferior. But she also knew that she could not go back to the way things were before. She had seen a better way of living and a kinder approach to dealing with others, and she wanted to bring that knowledge back to her people, even if they rejected it. The Sylvani had become so isolated in their belief of superiority that they had stopped growing and learning, and Kayla believed that would eventually destroy them if they did not change. When she finally arrived at the Guardian station where she was posted, her superior officer demanded a full report on what had happened during her mission. Kayla told the truth about the attack and the damage to her ship and the rescue by the human vessel, and she watched as her superior's expression grew colder with each word. He told her that she had brought shame to the Guardian Order by accepting help from humans, and that she would need to undergo a review by the Council to determine if she was still fit for duty. Kayla accepted the judgment calmly because she had expected it, but she also felt a strange sense of peace because she knew that whatever happened, she had made the right choice. That night, she contacted Lisa using the device Danny had given her, and they talked for hours about everything that had happened since they parted. Lisa told her about the new missions the Wanderer had undertaken and the interesting people they had met, and Kayla told her about the cold reception she had received from her superiors and her upcoming review with the Council. Lisa assured her that she had done nothing wrong and that asking for help when you needed it was a sign of wisdom, not weakness. She reminded Kayla that she always had a home on the Wanderer and that the crew missed her and the dragons terribly. Kayla felt tears slip down her cheeks as she realized how much these humans had come to mean to her in such a short time. She lay in her bed that night holding the crystal pendant Lisa had given her and thinking about the choice she would have to make soon, because she knew the Council would likely force her to choose between her position as a guardian and her connection to the humans. The Council chamber was exactly as cold and imposing as Kayla remembered, with its high ceilings and ancient stone walls that seemed designed to make anyone standing before the 7 Council members feel small and insignificant. Kayla stood in the center of the room with her head held high and the dragons perched on her shoulders because she refused to show weakness, even though her heart was pounding in her chest. The eldest council member spoke first, and his voice echoed through the chamber as he listed the charges against her, which included accepting aid from an inferior species and fraternizing with humans in a manner unbecoming of a guardian. He asked her if she denied these accusations, and Kayla stated clearly that she did not deny them because everything they said was true, and she would not lie to save herself. The council members exchanged glances that Kayla could not read, and then another member asked her to explain why she had chosen to accept human help when she could have simply waited for a Sylvani rescue vessel. Kayla took a deep breath and told them the truth, which was that there had been no Sylvani ships close enough to reach her before her life support failed, and that she had 2 sacred dragons depending on her to keep them alive. She explained that the human crew had been professional and skilled, and that they had repaired her ship to a higher standard than it had been before, while treating her with respect and kindness that she had rarely experienced even among her own people. She told them about the innovations Danny had made to her engine systems, and how the humans had shared their knowledge freely without asking for payment or favors in return. The council members did not seem impressed by her explanations, and the eldest member told her that guardians were expected to die with honor, rather than accept help from lesser species, because maintaining the dignity of the Sylvani Empire was more important than individual survival. His words hit Kayla like a slap, because she realized that her people valued pride over life and tradition over growth. Kayla felt anger rise in her chest, and she spoke before she could stop herself, telling the council that maybe their definition of honor was flawed if it required good people to die unnecessarily. She said that the humans had shown her what real strength looked like, and it was not about refusing help or pretending to be perfect, but about admitting when you needed support and being brave enough to accept it. The chamber fell silent, and Kayla could see shock and outrage on the faces of several council members because no one spoke to them this way, and especially not a young guardian who was supposed to show deference and obedience. But Kayla had spent too much time with humans who valued honesty over politeness, and she could not go back to pretending that the Silvani way was the only correct path. She continued speaking and told them that the Silvani had become so focused on maintaining their image of superiority that they had stopped learning and growing, and that isolation was making them weaker, not stronger. She said that humans might be a young species, but they had something the Silvani had lost, which was the ability to adapt and change and form genuine connections with others. The eldest council member stood up, and his face was dark with anger as he declared that Kayla had proven herself unfit to serve as a guardian, and that she was hereby stripped of her title and her position. He told her that she was banished from the Guardian Order, and that she should leave Silvani space immediately, because they had no place for someone who had been corrupted by human influence. Kayla felt the weight of his words, but instead of crushing her, they felt like a release because she realized that losing her position meant gaining her freedom. She bowed slightly to the council, not in submission but in farewell, and she turned to leave the chamber with the dragons chirping softly on her shoulders, sensing her mixed emotions through their bond. As she walked through the corridors of the Guardian Station for the last time, several of her former colleagues avoided her gaze because association with a banished guardian could damage their own reputations. But a few looked at her with expressions that might have been sympathy or even envy, because she had done what many of them secretly wished they could do, which was to question the rigid traditions that controlled their lives. Kayla returned to her quarters and gathered her few personal possessions, knowing that she would not be welcome here much longer. She pulled out the communication device Danny had given her and contacted Lisa to tell her what had happened and to ask if the offer to join the Wanderer crew was still open. Lisa's face appeared on the screen, and her expression shifted from surprise to concern to something that looked like joy as Kayla explained the situation. The commander told her that of course the offer was still open, and that the crew would be thrilled to have her permanently if that was what she wanted. She said that they could meet at the trading post in the neutral zone in 3 days if Kayla could make it there safely. Kayla felt relief wash over her, and she thanked Lisa before ending the communication so she could prepare for departure. She knew that leaving Silvani's space meant giving up everything she had ever known, including her family and her status, and her entire identity as a guardian. But she also knew that staying would mean denying the truth she had learned, which was that there were more important things than pride and tradition. The journey to the neutral zone trading post was long and gave Kayla plenty of time to think about the choice she had made and whether she would regret it later. The dragons seemed unconcerned and spent most of the trip playing with each other and napping in the sun that streamed through the viewport, and their contentment helped ease Kayla's anxiety about the uncertain future ahead. When she finally arrived at the trading post, she saw the Wanderer docked at one of the platforms, and her heart jumped in her chest because seeing the familiar ship felt like coming home in a way that returning to Silvani space never had. She guided her vessel into the dock next to the human ship and prepared to disembark, wondering if this was really the right decision or if she was making a terrible mistake. The airlock opened, and Lisa was there waiting with Amy and Danny and Kevin and several other crew members, and they were all smiling at her with such genuine happiness that Kayla felt her doubts dissolve. Lisa stepped forward and pulled her into a tight hug and told her welcome home, and Kayla realized that home was not a place, but the people who made you feel like you belonged. The crew helped her move her belongings onto the Wanderer, and they had already prepared permanent quarters for her that were larger than the temporary room she had used before. Someone had installed proper perches for the dragons, and there were plants growing near the window, and books on the shelves, and everything had been chosen with care to make her feel comfortable and welcome. That evening they held another celebration in the common area, and this time it was not a farewell but a welcome party for their newest crew member. People came up to Kayla throughout the night to tell her how glad they were that she had decided to stay and to share their own stories about leaving behind old lives to join the Wanderer crew. Kayla learned that many of the humans on this ship were like her in that they had chosen to walk away from expectations and traditions that did not fit who they really were. They had found family and purpose on this vessel, and now they were offering her the same opportunity to build a new life based on her own values, rather than the values imposed by others. Lisa found her later standing at the observation deck window, watching the stars, and she came to stand beside her in their familiar, comfortable silence. After a while, Lisa asked if Kayla was sure about her decision, and whether she had any regrets about leaving her people behind. Kayla thought about the question carefully before answering, and she told Lisa that she did feel sad about losing her connection to Silvani culture and her family, but that she did not regret choosing freedom and growth over stagnation and pride. She said that maybe someday the Silvani would change and learn to value connection over superiority, but until then she needed to live her own truth. Lisa reached out and took Kayla's hand, and they stood there together looking out at the infinite possibilities of the galaxy spread before them. Kayla realized that this was the beginning of a new chapter in her life, and that she had no idea what challenges and adventures awaited her, but she was ready to face them with people who valued her for who she was, rather than what she represented. The dragons flew over and landed on the railing in front of them, and Zephyr nuzzled against Lisa's cheek while Luna chirped happily at Kayla. The Guardian smiled and stroked both dragons gently, thinking about how much had changed since that desperate day when she sent out a distress signal, never imagining that being rescued by humans would transform her entire understanding of the universe. She had learned that true strength came from admitting weakness, and that real honor meant staying true to yourself, even when it cost you everything. She had discovered that the measure of a species was not in their technology or their traditions, but in their capacity for kindness and their willingness to help others without expecting anything in return. Most importantly, she had found a home and a family among the stars with a human crew, who had shown her that asking for help was not a sign of failure, but the beginning of something beautiful. And as the Wanderer prepared to leave the trading post and head out into the unknown,